Climbing systems are built to feel absolute. Clip in, trust the line, but when familiarity replaces verification, small details get overlooked. In this video, we're examining a climbing incident where the system that was supposed to protect a climber did something else, and that trust became the very thing that led to a fatal outcome. It was August the 12th, 2016, on Via Ferrata delle Trince in the Marmolada group of Italy's Dolomites. The route was busy, the sky was clear, and the rock was dry. Nothing about the weather suggested danger, but later, investigators would point to a different problem. In one short section of this ferrata, two steel lines ran close enough together that they could be mistaken for the same system. Only one of them was built to catch a human load. Elisa Moretti was among the climbers in that line. She was 34 years old and worked as a biology teacher at a secondary school in Vicenza. Co-workers later described her as organized and careful. In her job, she relied on procedures, lab rules, checklists, safety steps that only worked if people followed them. The same approach showed up in how she climbed. She used standard gear, followed normal ferrata practices, and wasn't known for risky behavior. Elisa had completed 7 Via Ferratas over 3 summers. Earlier in 2016, she had finished 3 routes in the Dolomites using the same equipment she carried on August 12th. Her helmet showed normal wear, but no visible damage. Her Via Ferrata set met modern safety standards and was less than 2 years old. After the incident, inspection found no defects or tampering. Toxicology later found no alcohol or drugs. She climbed during school breaks, usually with people who shared similar schedules. Co-workers, acquaintances, sometimes friends of friends. She carried a small notebook where she logged dates, routes, and conditions. She did not document her climbs online. On this route, she was part of a small group of independent climbers. There was no formal guide and no leader directing the movement. By late morning, congestion had formed along the upper sections. Climbers were spaced tightly along exposed ledges, waiting for traffic ahead to clear. Helmets were inches from the limestone. Hands rested on steel cables. Packs brushed the wall as people shifted their stance to stay balanced. There were no warnings posted about changing conditions. The delay was the kind people expected in August. Just crowding, nothing more. Via Ferrata delle Trince is known for mixed difficulty and heavy summer traffic. Much of the route is a controlled system, a thick, load-rated steel cable fixed to the rock with modern anchors designed to work with energy-absorbing lanyards. That is, the cable climbers are meant to clip into. But the route also contains older lines, steel remnants left from earlier route layouts, and historic military infrastructure. Some were kept in place for historical reasons, even after they were taken out of service. One decommissioned line ran parallel to the active safety cable near a known bottleneck. Its color had faded to the same dull gray. It sat at the same height. It followed the same direction until it didn't. Its anchor hardware was older and not designed for fall forces. By about 11:20 a.m., climbers were stacked at that bottleneck, waiting to pass a narrow traverse. Below, another group waited for the line to move. Above, the route was still, and in that stillness, small decisions started to matter more. The bottleneck sat just below a short, sideways traverse. The ledge narrowed to a strip of limestone, barely wide enough for one boot. On the left was the wall, close enough to steady yourself with a shoulder or forearm. On the right, the rock dropped away into a steep gully filled with broken stone. It was not a place designed for waiting, but on crowded days, waiting was unavoidable. Climbers stood single file, bodies turned sideways to fit. Helmets hovered close to the rock. Feet stayed planted on small edges that offered little margin for adjustment. Some climbers leaned forward, pressing forearms or chests into the wall to take weight off their legs. Others leaned back into the cable for brief relief, then leaned forward again when calves began to burn. Everyone was managing fatigue in small, controlled ways. The sounds along the ledge were routine. Carabiners slid along steel. A gate tapped an anchor. Fabric brushed limestone. Breathing was steady and shallow. These were the background noises of a ferrata in mid-season. Nothing stood out as unusual. Below the ledge, another group waited clipped in, facing the wall. Their instructors kept spacing tight and movement limited to reduce rockfall. Everyone in that section of the route was now dependent on the same thing, the line above clearing so the system could start moving again. As the delay stretched, climbers began making small adjustments. One person unclipped an arm of their lanyard, stepped sideways to reposition, then clipped back in. Others did the same. This was common practice in congested ferrata sections. It allowed people to keep moving without fully detaching from the system. No one reacted. No one called it out. It was part of the normal rhythm of the route. Elisa reached the bottleneck during this pause. Witnesses later said she appeared stable and unhurried. She had both feet set on small holds and one hand on the cable. She waited while the climbers ahead worked out their spacing. What was not obvious from the ledge was how closely two different steel lines ran together at this point. The active safety cable, the one designed to catch a fall, ran along the wall under tension, fixed with modern anchors. Beside it, for several meters, ran an older guideline. It was thinner, but visually similar. Years of exposure had dulled its surface to the same gray color. It sat at the same height and followed the same direction through the bottleneck. The older line was anchored with metal pitons, driven into limestone decades earlier. It had never been intended to hold dynamic loads. It was no longer part of the safety system. There was no physical barrier separating it from the active cable. A small warning plaque existed lower on the route, but from the congested ledge above, it was not visible. In tight space, with bodies pressed close to the wall, climbers relied more on touch than sight. Hands reached for steel where steel was expected to be. Clips were made by feel, often without a clear line of sight to the anchor points. As minutes passed and the line remained stalled, the overlap between old and new infrastructure became more than a historical detail. It became a problem of proximity. Elisa repositioned to reduce the strain of standing still. She unclipped one arm of her Y-shaped lanyard from the main safety cable, leaving the other arm attached. From the outside, she was still secured. She rotated her body sideways to create space and reached forward with her right hand toward the steel line in front of her. At that moment, both steel lines were within reach. They ran parallel through the bottleneck, separated by less than an arm's length. Both followed the same path across the rock. Both were fixed at roughly the same height. Both were worn to the same dull gray by years of weather and touch. In the tight space of the ledge, with climbers stacked front to back and bodies turned sideways to fit, the lines visually overlapped. Elisa's right hand closed around steel. Witnesses nearby later described her movement as deliberate and unhurried. She did not lunge. She did not rush. Her hand reached forward at the same way others had moments earlier, searching by feel rather than sight. The line felt solid, cold, continuous. It resisted slightly under her grip, the way a tensioned cable does when touched. From her position, there was no clear visual cue that distinguished one line from the other. The wall pressed close to her left side. Her helmet was angled toward the rock, not outward. Her field of view was limited by proximity, posture, and the need to maintain balance on small footholds. She clipped her carabiner onto the line. Several climbers within a few meters later reported hearing the sound. It was a clean, sharp snap, the gate closing fully. On a via ferrata, that sound carries meaning. It usually signals completion, connection, security. No one reacted because nothing about the sound suggested a problem. No one warned her because no one recognized a mistake. From the outside, the movement looked routine. Elisa shifted her weight away from the wall. For a brief moment, the system appeared to respond normally. The steel line accepted her body weight. Her hands released the rock. Her posture changed in the familiar sequence climbers use when transferring load. Hips moving outward, shoulders settling back, legs straightening slightly. Other climbers had made the same adjustment earlier that morning. Investigators later noted that this exact maneuver, unclipping one arm, clipping another line, leaning back, had been repeated dozens of times along the route that day without incident. This pause lasted less than a second, but it mattered. It was long enough for the weight transfer to complete, long enough for the body to commit, long enough for the system, whatever it was attached to become the sole support. The carabiner was not clipped to the load-rated safety cable. It was clipped to the decommissioned guideline that ran beside it. That distinction was not visible in motion. It existed only in design and history. The guideline was thinner, older, and anchored with hardware installed decades earlier. It had been intended to guide movement, not arrest a fall. Its anchor, a metal piton driven into limestone, had only ever held static tension from its own weight and occasional incidental contact. It had never been tested under dynamic load. Investigators later determined that the piton had remained in place through multiple route updates. When the ferrata was modernized, the line was left for historical preservation. No physical barrier separated it from the active safety system. The only warning, a small plaque lower on the route, was not visible from the bottleneck. At the moment Elisa leaned back, the anchor experienced a force it had never been designed to absorb. The failure did not announce itself. There was no creaking from the rock, no audible strain from the metal, no visible bending of the poton. The limestone surrounding the anchor had been weathered by years of freeze-thaw cycles, reducing its holding strength without changing its outward appearance. When the load peaked, the piton tore free all at once. A small section of limestone came with it, breaking loose in a single motion. The guide line snapped upward as tension vanished. Recoiling toward the wall, the release was instantaneous. From the ledge, it did not look like something broke. It looked like something disappeared, and she fell backward. Her feet dropped first as her center of mass moved away from the wall. The separation was immediate and unforgiving. Once her weight shifted beyond the line of support, gravity took over faster than muscle response could follow. Within the first meter, her body rotated outward, pulling her hips away from the rock and tipping her upside down. What had been a vertical stance became open air almost instantly. For the first seconds, there was no controlled movement, no sliding, no scraping, no gradual loss of contact. She fell cleanly, fully detached from the wall. Investigators later emphasized how critical this detail was. Without early contact, no friction, no glancing blow, no surface to bleed off speed, her body accelerated, uninterrupted. Every fraction of a second increased velocity, compounding the forces that would come later. Witnesses initially believed there had been no attempt to grab for the rock. From above, it looked like a sudden disappearance, her body dropping straight down between ledges. But later, reconstruction and the position of her body suggested otherwise. Approximately 15 feet into the fall, her trajectory carried her close enough to the wall that her right arm brushed the limestone. The contact was brief and instinctive. Fingers scraped across the surface, searching for anything that might slow her descent. At roughly 20 feet, she managed to catch something, a narrow juniper branch growing out of a fracture in the rock, or possibly a small protruding horn of stone. The distinction would later be debated. What mattered was that for a fraction of a second, the fall changed character. Her right hand closed around it. The grab was real. It was not a visual illusion or wishful reconstruction. Scrape marks were later found on the branch and on the rock just below it, aligned with the angle of her fall. Skin was recovered under her glove cuff. The evidence showed that she did make contact and that she did try, but the forces involved were already too great. By the time her hand caught, her downward speed was far beyond what a single grip, especially an unprotected one, could withstand. Her arm took the load first. The sudden transfer of force wrenched her shoulder violently, exceeding its natural range of motion. The joint failed almost immediately. Whether the branch snapped or her grip tore free, first was impossible to determine, but the result was the same. The contact lasted less than half a second. That half second mattered, but not enough. The grab did not stop the fall. It redirected it. As her arm released, the brief resistance altered her rotation, swinging her body inward toward the wall instead of straight down the chute. This change in angle set up the first major impact. After approximately 25 feet of total fall distance, her helmet struck the limestone. The impact was blunt and direct. The helmet shell fractured on contact but did not detach. It absorbed part of the force, but not enough to prevent transmission into the skull and upper cervical spine. The angle of impact suggested she was still rotating, which reduced surface contact and concentrated the force into a smaller area. Investigators later noted that this type of angled head strike is especially severe, not because of height alone, but because of how little energy is spread across the body. The collision did not arrest her descent. It marked the transition from free fall into a series of uncontrolled impacts. Her body dropped fully into the gully below, where the terrain changed abruptly. What had been open air became a steep, irregular chute filled with broken limestone, narrow ledges, and loose debris. This was not a smooth slide path. Nothing entering it moved cleanly from top to bottom. The first impact inside the gully came almost immediately after the helmet strike. Her upper torso hit a protruding rib of rock, snapping her rotation and forcing her body into a new orientation. The sound carried upward, dull, heavy, and out of rhythm with the fall itself. Climbers above later described it as different from the sound of falling stone, deeper, slower, unmistakably human. Momentum carried her onward. A second impact followed the seconds later, louder and lower, as her left hip and thigh struck a slanted ledge. The force was enough to fracture bone on contact. Loose rock broke free beneath her, adding to the debris cascading down the chute. Each impact changed her path. She did not fall straight down. She bounced, twisted, and was redirected repeatedly, driven by gravity but shaped by whatever surface she struck next. Her right shoulder hit another ledge, forcing the arm backward beyond its normal range. The joint had already been compromised during the failed grab above. This impact completed the damage. Below, climbers pressed themselves flat against the wall as stones and fragments rained past them. Helmets were struck. Dust filled the air. No one moved. A third major impact bent her lower back sharply against the rock, folding her body in a way that forced the torso out of alignment with the legs. This contact slowed her briefly, just long enough for gravity to pull her into another rotation. Her head struck again, harder than before, just as her speed began to decrease due to repeated collisions. Small pieces of equipment separated during this phase. A loose strap tore free. A dark object, possibly a glove or accessory pouch, was seen falling independently, tumbling ahead of her before disappearing deeper into the gully. Pebbles and fist-sized stones followed, creating an uneven, rattling cascade that echoed between the rock walls. Witnesses below described the sound pattern as chaotic. There was no steady rhythm, no predictable spacing between impacts. The noise came whenever her body met something solid, followed by brief silences filled only with falling debris and rushing air. The final impacts were lower energy, but no less fatal. By the time her body reached the ledge where it came to rest, the accumulated trauma was already catastrophic. The earlier grab, the moment where she briefly held on, had changed the path of the fall, but not its outcome. Investigators later noted that the attempt likely increased rotational forces rather than reducing them, contributing to the severity of subsequent impacts. From above, climbers saw only fragments of the sequence, brief flashes of movement between ledges, then stillness. From below, they heard it first, the sharp metallic crack of the anchor failure, the irregular impacts, the debris raining past, long before anyone could see where she had landed. By the time the last stone settled, the system failure was complete. Everything that followed, the silence, the roots locked down, the recovery, traced back to a single second at the top and another half second in midair when a hand found something to hold, and it still wasn't enough. We cover more climbing failures like this, so subscribe if you want to understand how routine systems can turn fatal without warning. From above, the view was fragmented and incomplete. Climbers saw the fall only in brief flashes, an arm appearing between ledges, the white curve of a helmet, then nothing as the body disappeared behind rock. Each glimpse was separated by silence and distance. From below, the angle of the gully blocked most of the view entirely. People there heard more than they saw. A sharp impact, then another, followed by the uneven sound of debris moving through the chute. The lack of a clear visual made the sequence harder to understand in real time. The fall ended nearly 300 feet below the point where Elisa had clipped in. Her body came to rest on a narrow, slanted ledge partway down the gully. The surface was uneven and coated in fine dust shaken loose by impacts above. She stopped inverted, her legs elevated above her hips, the torso twisted sharply to one side. One arm lay extended away from the body at an angle that did not align with the rest of her posture. The front of the helmet was crushed inward, its shape visibly distorted. There was no movement. For several seconds afterward, the road above remained completely still. Climbers froze where they were, hands locked on the cable, feet braced against the rock. No one advanced, no one backed up. The bottleneck held in silence. Below, guides tightened spacing and pressed their groups closer to the wall. Movement stopped completely. Loose stone continued to fall in short bursts as debris settled, confirming that the gully remained unstable. One adult climber below unclipped and attempted to descend toward the ledge where Elisa had stopped. He moved only a short distance before more stones came loose above him. He clipped back immediately and did not continue. The incident was no longer unfolding. It had already happened. Everything that followed was response. With the fall complete, the route entered a holding pattern. Climbers closest to the bottleneck stayed exactly where they were, clipped in and facing the wall. No one tried to move through the narrow section. The space above and below the gully was treated as unstable, and any unnecessary motion risked sending more stone down the chute. Below the bottleneck, guides limited movement to short, controlled adjustments. Groups were pressed closer to the wall, spacing tightened, and everyone remained clipped in. The gully continued to shed small rocks at irregular intervals. Pebbles and fragments rattled past boots and helmets, confirming that the slope had not settled. Several climbers began making emergency calls. Phones were passed between hands as people tried to find a signal. Reception was uneven along the wall. Calls dropped mid-sentence. Coordinates were repeated and corrected. Descriptions of the route, the bottleneck, and nearby landmarks were relayed more than once as callers tried to make sure responders understood where the incident had occurred. From the ledge near the failure point, the broken guideline was visible. Its free end hung loose in the air, moving slightly with shifting air currents. The active safety cable ran alongside it, still under tension and fixed firmly to the rock. From that angle, the two lines still looked similar in height and alignment, despite serving completely different purposes. As minutes passed, climbers remained frozen in place. No one attempted to pass the bottleneck. What was normally a steady flow became a series of fixed positions, with people waiting for instructions. Phone service was unreliable, so information moved slowly by voice from one climber to the next. About 48 minutes after the fall, a helicopter arrived and held back from the wall to avoid triggering more rockfall. A rescuer was lowered to the ledge where Elisa lay. Her injuries were immediately apparent, and death was confirmed at the scene. Loose stone continued to fall, and extraction was ruled out. Climbers were ordered to remain clipped in place, and the route stayed closed. Once conditions stabilized, responders documented the scene and flagged the failed line. Recovery took hours. Investigators later confirmed Elisa's equipment was intact. The safety cable had not failed. Instead, a decades-old, non-load rated guideline was mistakenly clipped, pulling free from softened limestone. The post-mortem confirmed death occurred within seconds. Massive head and spinal trauma exceeded survivable limits, with catastrophic internal injuries and no indication of prolonged survival. The incident was classified as a climbing fatality caused by infrastructure failure and system misidentification. No criminal investigation was opened. No citations were issued to other climbers on the route. In the weeks following the incident, regional maintenance crews returned quietly. Several decommissioned guidelines in that area were removed. The work was not publicized and was not accompanied by a formal safety notice. Historical plaques remained in place. The visual character of the route was largely preserved, but one source of overlap had been reduced. Elisa Moretti's death was recorded in official reports as a climbing fatality caused by infrastructure failure and misidentification of a safety system. There was no further legal action. No fault was assigned to other climbers on the route. The system, as a whole, was not considered defective, only ambiguous in one critical location. Every August, Via Ferrata delle Trince fills again with climbers. Bottlenecks still form. People still unclip and reclip to reposition. Steel still runs along the wall at hand height, guiding movement through exposed sections. From a distance, the system looks complete and uninterrupted. The final horror of this incident is not the fall itself. It is how ordinary the mistake was. Nothing about Elisa's actions stood out. She used proper gear. She followed common practice. She trusted a system that had worked for countless climbers before her. The failure occurred not because the system was ignored, but because it looked finished when it wasn't. Thank you for watching. Click here for more videos.